The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. They were an icon of American transportation, known for their luxury passenger trains, wide array of unique motive power, and striking paint schemes that have been world famous for decades. While old Uncle John originally got into the high-speed train game with passenger carriers such as the Super Chief and El Capitan, they eventually applied these practices to freighters during the late 60s, giving us the Super C, the world's fastest freight train. In 40 hours or less, it would make the 2,200-mile run from Chicago to LA nearly non-stop, reaching speeds of 90 miles an hour as it highballed up and down the Southern Transcon. The Super C was truly a unique freight train and was a pretty dang good move from a business standpoint. But ultimately, it was a failure. So what happened? What was the world's fastest freight train? And why did it not even last 10 years? The Super C came about in the late 60s, and if you know your railroading history, you'll know this was a time of experimentation for many rail companies across the nation. The SCL was building the Whopper Hopper, Southern had just debuted their radio cars, and the Santa Fe was looking to revolutionize TOFC and COFC service, not only to make a profit for themselves, but also to give customers options on just how their cargo can be shipped. So a crazy plan was devised by the company's president, John Reed. For a premium rate of $1,400 to $1,500 more per container, customers could have their cargo depart Los Angeles and arrive in Chicago not even 2 days later. An impressive feat for sure, especially considering regular overnight mail was still several years away. But Chicago to LA service wasn't the only thing the Super C was made for. In a partnership with Penn Central, Santa Fe intended to use its lightning-fast train to form one of America's first long-distance land bridges, connecting New York City and Los Angeles in a way that had never been done before. Not only did this land bridge slash shipping times for coast-to-coast freight, but it also played a key part on the international stage. Many goods traveling between Europe and Asia were and still are shipped on the Southern Transcon instead of the Panama Canal. And while the Super C did carry some of this international freight, surprisingly, this wasn't its main cargo.
Santa Fe, all the way.
It's fun to ride the train.
Santa Fe.
As you may have noticed, the Super C looks quite different from any other freight train out there. It's way overpowered, using at least 2 to 4 SD45s, FP45s, or U30CGs during its earlier years, and it's shorter than even most local freights. As for the excess power, only passenger locomotives and SD45s geared for high speeds could be used to haul the Super C. They were the only things that could keep the train going fast enough for a timely arrival. The multiple engines also allowed this ballast burner to get going and stop extremely quickly, while simultaneously adding security. Because if one or even 2 of these locomotives fail, you've still got several more that are plenty capable of pulling the train. But why is it so short? Usually, the Super C was no more than 20 cars long, and sometimes it would run with only 1 car. This is because there just weren't very many customers that needed this premium service, which is also why the Super C never became an integral part of the land bridge like it was intended to. Domestic auto parts, electronics, and mail was just about all this train carried, and sometimes standard rate cargo would be thrown in just to make that day's run profitable. Interestingly, if it weren't for the U.S. Postal Service, the Super C never would have gotten off the ground, because they gave Santa Fe a huge mail carrying contract for the western U.S. when the train first debuted.
Very hard to keep it that low.
On the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe.
As you can imagine, trying to run multiple trains non-stop over one of the busiest rail corridors in the nation is no easy feat. In order for Santa Fe to fulfill its promise of 40-hour service between Chicago and LA, the Super C was allowed to abide by special rule number 10, meaning it traveled at 80 miles an hour over the Southern Transcon. However, Engineers tended to take things into their own hands once a train got into ABS territory. Since all the signals were automatic, there wasn't much need to communicate with dispatch, and there was no such thing as PTC. Train crews would frequently throttle up to 90 miles an hour, which is why the Super C was regularly 2 to 4 hours early upon arrival. And on many occasions, it broke its own time record. Of course, the Super C was the highest priority train on the Santa Fe, meaning traffic up and down the line had to yield to it, no matter what. However, this is the Southern Transcon we're talking about. It's nearly all double-track mainline and has at least a couple hundred trains running on it at all times, so orchestrating meets and overtakes could be extremely difficult for dispatchers and operators. For starters, sidings are few and far between, so most of the time, they're artificially made with crossover switch alignment and signal aspects, and if a low-priority train is stopped for too long, others will start to pile up behind it. So for the Super C to pass just one train, many more would sometimes need to be held, which could really throw a wrench in dispatch operations. Also, dispatch had to be ready to line the Super C through at the drop of a hat. Apart from the various crew changes along the way, there were a few cities such as Phoenix, Amarillo, and Kansas City where the train would stop to interchange and take on cargo, or swap power. And may God have mercy on any dispatcher who was responsible for allowing that train a late departure. Even though the Super C was a fantastic concept, it eventually fell through in the mid-70s. Remember that mail contract the USPS gave Santa Fe when the train first debuted? Well, it eventually went up for auction, and the winning bidder was Union Pacific. The loss of this contract really pulled the rug out from under Uncle John. Their highball and intermodal didn't have many customers to begin with, and they just lost their biggest one. So to the relief of dispatchers everywhere, the Super C was discontinued in mid-1976. Even if Santa Fe would have kept the contract, I don't think the world's fastest freight train would have lasted much longer. Made possible by a partnership with C&W, Union Pacific could ship freight from Chicago to LA only 10 hours slower than the Santa Fe, and it didn't cost their customers extra. Nonetheless, the Super C will always be remembered as one of the most unique and well-run freight trains America's ever seen. Thanks for watching. If y'all enjoyed this video, consider checking out some other ones of mine. Also, maybe pass yourself by the merch shop. Anyways, till next time.